Hi, I'm attorney Andrew Thompson with the Thompson Law Office in Carmel, Indiana. In this video, we're talking about winning legal strategies involving cases of fraud. And that is both on the side of a person who has been defrauded or a party who has been wrongly charged with fraud. How do you handle such cases and what do you do? Okay. First piece of advice is consult with a good, competent attorney right away. How does a fraud issue arise? A lot of people don't think about the context in which fraud arises. We see it a lot in big corporate versus consumer types of transactions, but we also see it in business transactions between two parties with relatively equal bargaining power. So I'll give you two different examples. The first one would be cases of mortgage fraud. If a broker is retained or utilized by a homeowner in the purchase of a home, and for example, they would have procured an appraisal that was 50% or 100% more than the actual value of the home, there's a good potential that fraud existed somewhere along the line in the transaction. We've seen it more poignantly in a case where the broker or underwriter determined that there was no need for a particular type of insurance, like flood insurance, for example. And within months, a property was badly flooded. Okay, that's a prime example of where fraud might arise. Now, thinking about that more broadly, under Indiana rules, like the rules of most states and the federal courts, if you're going to allege fraud, your allegations have to be very specific and they have to identify what the fraud actually was. That can be difficult because if a party is going to defraud you, they're going to do the best they can to hide whatever they've done in that fraudulent effort. I'll give you another example of how fraud might arise. Let's say two parties of relatively equal size are trying to enter into a transaction involving the purchase of a business. Okay, let's say that business is worth maybe $800,000, something in that neighborhood. And in setting up the financial statements that induce the seller to finance the sale of that business, the buyer comes up with a lot of assets, more income, less liabilities, fewer expenses than what they truly have. And it's very significant. In other words, they are doing it intentionally for the purpose of inducing the seller to enter into that transaction. Classic example of how fraud occurs. Again, the allegations have to be very specific, and in a case like that, it becomes a little bit easier. It becomes a little bit easier because the seller can go back to the financial statements that the buyer produced, and if they can't back them up with factual evidence to support that they did have those assets, then apparently there's fraud in the case and you can go forward. Okay, fraud cases are very challenging. They're challenging on a lot of levels. They're interesting and they have high stakes involved. And we see it in so many different types of situations. And again, the thing I'd like to encourage you to do is think about consulting with an attorney if you have the potential for an issue of fraud that could arise in any context. A consumer transaction, a business transaction. It could arise in wills or probate, and a whole host of other ways. If you need help evaluating a case involving the potential for fraud, please call us at the Thompson Law Office, area code 317-564-4976, or find us on the web at www.thompsonlaw-in.com.